You know, when the fire alarm goes off in a crowded building, the instructions are, like, always exactly the same.
Right. Proceed calmly to the nearest exit. Do not run.
Yeah, exactly. Take a deep breath. It's this highly controlled systemic suppression of panic. We basically demand order over chaos.
And, well, there's a really good reason for that in a burning building,
Mm.
Panic creates bottlenecks.
Oh, for sure. It causes stampedes.
Right. The collective instruction to remain calm is designed to save lives in a very specific physical emergency.
But here is where it gets kind of strange to me. We treat our own internal biology the exact same way we treat a crowded building.
We really do.
Like when your heart starts pounding before a big presentation at work or your palms start sweating before a massive test, every piece of advice you've ever been given is basically, well, it's just quiet the alarm, take a deep breath, just calm down.
Yeah, we treat our own nervous system like it's a liability.
Exactly.
And that's because, culturally, we've been conditioned to interpret that physical alarm as a sign of impending disaster.
Like the stress itself is a toxin.
Precisely. We have this pervasive medical and social narrative.
Hmm.
And the narrative is that if your heart is racing and your stomach is in knots, you are actively degrading your health.
That you're ruining your ability to function.
Right.
But, and this is the core of our deep dive today, what if calming down is actually the absolute worst possible advice you could receive?
That's a huge question.
It is. What if those knots in your stomach aren't a warning that you're about to fail, but are actually your body's frantic attempt to help you win?
Which completely flips the script.
Completely. That is our mission today. We are going to fundamentally change your relationship with stress. Right here, right now.
Because trying to eliminate stress is practically impossible.
And maybe even detrimental to your goals. So we are looking at over a decade of groundbreaking research into what psychologists call stress reappraisal and stress mindset.
We're diving into the hard cardiovascular science here, and the neuroendocrinology too.
Right, to show you that stress is not uniformly toxic. And the science here represents a total paradigm shift.
It really does. By altering our cognitive appraisals in that fleeting moment of panic, we can change everything.
And by shifting our overarching mindsets about the nature of stress itself.
Exactly. We can literally rewire our biological responses. We can shift our bodies from a debilitating state of threat to an empowering state of challenge.
Okay, but before we can learn how to rewire that response, we really need to understand the machinery behind it.
We have to connect those everyday feelings of panic to the biology.
Right, like that tightness in your chest when your boss sends an email saying, we need to talk. We need to connect that to the hard cardiovascular reality happening under your skin.
Which brings us to a really foundational paper.
Yes, from 2012. This is by Jamieson, Matthew Nock, and Wendy Berry Mendez. It was published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, General.
A classic in the field.
It's titled Mind Over Matter. Reappraising Arousal Improves Cardiovascular and Cognitive Responses to Stress. And they outline this framework called the Biopsychosocial Model of Challenge and Threat, or just the BPS model.
Right, the BPS model.
I want to spend some real time here, because this dictates everything else we're going to talk about today.
Well, the BPS model is essential because it dispels a massive myth.
Which is?
The myth that your physical stress response is just a blind, involuntary reflex. It isn't just a switch that gets flipped.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's actually driven by an incredibly rapid, largely subconscious appraisal process in your brain.
So when you're facing an active, goal-directed task like giving a speech or taking an exam.
Or even playing a competitive sport, yeah. Your brain instantly acts like a supercomputer. It starts weighing two distinct columns of data.
Okay, what's in the first column?
The first column is the situational demands. This includes the perceived danger, the uncertainty of the outcome, and just the sheer effort required to get through it.
Okay, so let's say I'm staring down a difficult math exam. The demands are high.
Very high.
I mean, I don't know the questions, my grade is on the line, and I know it's going to take 2 hours of intense focus.
Right. But simultaneously, in the second column, your brain assesses your personal resources.
Things like my background knowledge.
Exactly. Your background knowledge, your trained skills, and your emotional coping abilities.
Oh, I see.
It is constantly calculating, do I have what it takes to meet the demands of what is in front of me?
It's basically doing a threat assessment calculation in a fraction of a second. Demands versus resources.
And the result of that calculation triggers one of two very distinct biological cascades. The first is the threat response.
Threat response, okay.
This happens when your brain calculates that the situational demands actually outweigh your personal resources.
So you feel completely outmatched.
Yes. Physiologically, this triggers the sympathetic adrenal medullary axis, which is often just called the SAM axis.
Oh, that's the classic fight or flight pathway, right? The big adrenaline dump.
It is. But crucially, in a state of threat, this SAM activation is characterized by two very specific, very damaging cardiovascular features.
What are they?
Reduced cardiac efficiency and massive vasoconstriction.
Vasoconstriction, that's the literal tightening and narrowing of your blood vessels.
Exactly. Your vessels clamp down.
Let's try to visualize this, because I think this is so important. In a threat state, my brain recognizes I'm outmatched. It dumps adrenaline, so my heart starts beating incredibly fast.
Right, your heart is racing.
But at the exact same time, it is clamping down on my blood vessels.
Well,
It's like slamming your foot on the gas pedal of a car while the parking brake is still firmly engaged.
that is a perfect analogy.
The engine is screaming, the RPMs are redlining, but you are deliberately restricting the forward motion. You're just causing immense mechanical wear and tear on the whole system.
I think that parking brake analogy captures the mechanical friction perfectly. Because, evolutionarily, this vasoconstriction actually served a purpose.
Really? How so?
Well, if you are facing a literal predator, and you are likely to lose the fight, constricting the blood vessels in your extremities means you will bleed out slower when you get bitten.
Oh, wow. That is dark, but it makes total sense.
It's an avoidance orientation. Your body is basically bracing for damage.
But in the modern world, your boss's email isn't going to bite your arm off.
Right, but your body doesn't know the difference. It just knows you're outmatched, so it clamps down on the blood flow.
Which brings us to the second biological cascade, right?
Yes, the challenge response. This occurs when your brain does the math and calculates that your personal resources are actually sufficient to meet the situational demands.
So you might still be facing a huge test, but you actually believe you have the skills to handle it.
Exactly. And here is the fascinating part. This also activates the exact same SAM axis.
Wait, so my heart is still pounding just as hard.
Yep,
I still have that massive adrenaline dump.
you do. But the cardiovascular profile is entirely inverted. A challenge state causes increased cardiac efficiency in something called vasodilation. That's the widening and relaxing of your blood vessels.
Okay, so my brain basically takes the parking brake off.
The parking brake is off, the engine is revving, your heart rate is high, but the vessels are wide open. This dramatically increases peripheral blood flow.
This is an approach orientation then.
Exactly. The blood is rushing freely to your prefrontal cortex, which enhances your focus, and to your muscles, preparing you to actually engage. The friction is completely gone.
And the long-term difference between these two states is massive, isn't it?
Oh, it's monumental.
Like if I spend my whole life walking into meetings with the parking brake on, what does that actually do to my body?
The physiological toll is severe. The research clearly indicates that prolonged threat responses, basically living chronically with that wear and tear from restricted blood flow, are explicitly linked to accelerated brain aging.
Wow. Accelerated brain aging.
Yeah, cognitive decline and cardiovascular disease too.
Is there specific data on that?
Definitely. Studies from Matthews back in 1997 and Jefferson in 2010 showed that the microvascular damage from chronic threat states literally ages your neural architecture.
That is terrifying.
You are starving your brain of efficient blood flow during moments of high cognitive demand. Conversely, the challenge response actually promotes cellular thriving and resilience.
Okay, which brings us to the million-dollar question for anyone listening to this right now.
Let's hear it.
If both of these states, threat and challenge, start with the exact same sensation of a racing heart and sweaty palms, can you consciously intervene? Like, can you actually force your body to take off the parking brake?
The answer is absolutely yes, and it starts with a psychological intervention known as arousal reappraisal.
Arousal reappraisal. I want to dig into the mechanics of this because I am inherently skeptical of anything that sounds like, just think happy thoughts.
Right, it sounds a bit like self-help fluff if you don't know the science.
Exactly. But we're looking at a landmark 2010 paper from Jamieson and colleagues. It was published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology.
The title of that one is brilliant.
It really is. Turning the knots in your stomach into bows. Reappraising arousal improves performance on the GRE.
The GRE, the Graduate Record Examination, is just the perfect testing ground for this.
Because it's so high stakes.
Incredibly high stakes.
Yeah.
Your score dictates your acceptance into graduate programs. It induces a profound threat state in most test takers. So the researchers brought 60 students into the lab who were actively prepping for this exact exam.
And what did the intervention actually look like? Did they sit them down and do a meditation session or something?
No, and that is what makes this so revolutionary. They gave half the students a very simple instruction. They essentially taught them the biology we just discussed.
Wait, they just taught them the science?
Basically, yeah. They told these students that the physiological arousal they were about to feel, the rapid heartbeat, the shallow breathing, actually predicts better cognitive performance. They were explicitly instructed that when they felt those knots in their stomach, they needed to remind themselves that their body was actively marshaling resources to help them ace the test.
So they were taught to praise the physical sensation not as panic, but as power.
Exactly.
Okay, so they give them this instruction, but how do we know they didn't just, I don't know, feel a little more relaxed?
Because the researchers didn't rely on subjective surveys, they actually measured the biology.
Okay, now we're talking. What did they measure?
They collected saliva samples to track a protein called salivary alpha amylase, or SAA for short.
What exactly does salivary alpha amylase tell us?
It acts as a highly sensitive, nonspecific biomarker for sympathetic nervous system activation.
Okay.
It converges with catecholamines like adrenaline and norepinephrine, so when your fight-or-flight system engages, SAA levels spike.
Got it. So it gives researchers a clear window into how revved up the nervous system truly is during a stressful event. So if the traditional advice to take a deep breath and calm down actually works, we would expect the students who receive the reappraisal instruction to show lower levels of this stress protein, right? We'd expect them to be calmer.
That is the logical assumption most people make.
Yeah.
But the data showed the exact opposite.
Really?
Yeah, the participants who were taught to reappraise their arousal showed a massive, dramatic increase in SAA immediately preceding the testing.
Wait, so their sympathetic nervous systems were highly engaged?
Incredibly highly engaged. Their biological engines were revving much harder than the control group.
Do we know the exact numbers?
We do. The mean for the reappraisal group was 24.86, whereas the control group actually had a negative mean of negative 10.66.
Oh, wow.
And the effect size, the Cohen's d, was 1.01. That is a massive effect. The biological shift was the equivalent of night and day.
This is so counterintuitive to me. Telling someone that their racing heart is actually a good thing made their physical arousal spike even higher. They got more stressed, biologically speaking, but what happened to their test scores?
Because they had cognitively appraised this intense arousal as a helpful resource rather than a threat, they had taken the parking brake off.
Right.
All that extra biological juice translated directly into better performance. They scored significantly better on the math section of the practice GRE in the lab.
But didn't they track them later on, too?
They did. The truly remarkable part is the longitudinal follow-up. 1 to 3 months later, those exact same students took the actual official GRE. The researchers checked their official scores. The reappraisal group scored substantially higher on the quantitative section than the control group.
That is amazing.
And when surveyed, they explicitly reported that when they felt their heart racing on test day, they used that arousal to push through the exam.
I am just fascinated by why trying to stay calm fails so miserably. To understand this better, I was looking at that 2012 Mind Over Matter paper again, the one where they used something called the Trier Social Stress Test, or the TSST.
Oh, the TSST. It is effectively the gold standard in psychological research for reliably inducing acute stress in human subjects.
I read about it, and it honestly sounds diabolical.
It is a nightmare.
You are asked to give an impromptu speech, usually defending your qualifications for a job, to a panel of judges in lab coats.
Right.
And the judges are specifically trained to be entirely unresponsive. No smiling, no nodding, just blank, judgmental stares.
It's awful.
And if you stop talking before the time is up, they just stare at you in silence until you continue.
It reliably triggers a massive threat response. And that's because the social evaluative threat, the fear of being judged negatively by the tribe, is one of the most primal fears humans possess.
The situational demands just absolutely skyrocket.
Exactly. So in this 2012 study, they had a group that was taught arousal reappraisal, embracing the stress.
Right.
But they also had a group they called the attention reorientation group.
And what did that group do?
This group was told to do what almost all of us do naturally. They were told to try to ignore the stress, try to look away from the judges, ignore the negative cues, and basically suppress the panic.
Okay, so when they hooked these participants up to the cardiovascular monitors, what happened?
The difference was profound. The reappraisal group, the ones actively embracing the fire, showed highly adaptive cardiovascular responses.
They took the parking brake off.
Yes, they demonstrated lower total peripheral resistance. This means their blood vessels were relaxed and dilated.
In their heart.
They had higher cardiac output, meaning their heart was pumping more blood per minute. They were in a pure challenge state.
But the group that tried to suppress and ignore the stress, the attention reorientation group?
They remained trapped in a threat state. High vascular resistance, lower cardiac efficiency.
Wow.
And furthermore, on cognitive tests administered immediately after the speech, the group that tried to ignore their stress showed a high attentional bias toward emotionally negative information.
Meaning their brains were basically stuck looking for danger. I really want to understand the mechanism here. Why does ignoring the stress, which, let's be honest, feels like the safest, most logical thing to do when you're panicking, why does that actually sabotage your biology and your brain?
It all comes down to a concept called cognitive load theory and the mechanics of resource allocation.
Let's unpack that.
Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex problem-solving, working memory, and eloquent speech, it has a limited bandwidth.
Okay.
Suppression is incredibly cognitively taxing. When you stand in front of those unsmiling judges, your body is screaming at you that you are in danger.
Right, my alarm bells are ringing.
And if you try to force yourself to appear calm and ignore those signals, your prefrontal cortex has to work overtime just to mask the physical symptoms.
So my brain is using all its processing power just to hide the fact that my hands are shaking and my voice is trembling.
Exactly. You are essentially entering into a biological war with yourself. And because your cognitive bandwidth is entirely consumed by the effort of suppressing the panic, you have almost no resources left.
No resources left for the actual task?
Right. You have nothing left to actually formulate a coherent speech or solve a complex math equation. Your working memory is completely hijacked by the effort of emotional suppression.
That makes so much sense. So reappraisal works because it doesn't try to stop the train. It just switches the tracks.
That's a great way to put it.
When you reappraise the arousal, you don't have to waste any brain power fighting the shaking hands or the racing heart. You just accept that fiery energy as a valid, functional response.
Which immediately frees up your prefrontal cortex to focus entirely on the task.
Oh, yeah.
You are redirecting the adrenaline rather than fighting it.
You stop fighting the current and start using it to turn the turbine.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've seen this work in the pristine, controlled environment of a laboratory, and we've seen it work with students practicing for a standardized test, but real life is incredibly messy.
Very messy.
Does this intervention hold up in an actual classroom with real students whose actual futures and livelihoods are on the line?
This was a vital question for the researchers. They knew they needed to move from the laboratory into the field.
And that brings us to the 2016 paper, right?
Yes. This is by Jamieson and colleagues, published as Social, Psychological, and Personality Science. It's titled Reappraising Stress Arousal, Improves Performance, and Reduces Evaluation Anxiety in Classroom Exam Situations.
They took this intervention into a community college developmental mathematics course.
They did.
And we should really pause to recognize the stakes here. For many community college students, passing a developmental math class is the single biggest bottleneck to graduation.
It is a massive hurdle.
Many of these students are older, they're working multiple jobs, and they often carry deep-seated anxieties about math. If they fail this class, they might drop out entirely. The real-world pressure is immense.
The experimental design here was beautifully simple and highly scalable. Baseline measures were taken before the first exam of the semester.
Okay.
Then, right before exam 2, students were randomly assigned to read a short piece of text.
Just a reading assignment.
It's just a short text. The reappraisal group read materials that explicitly detailed the adaptive, evolutionary benefits of stress. It explained how a racing heart increases oxygen flow to the brain and prepares the body to achieve peak focus.
And what about the control group?
The control group, acting as a placebo, read summaries suggesting the traditional advice. Basically that they should ignore their stress and try to remain calm.
So it's essentially just reading a specialized pamphlet before the test gets handed out.
Yes. And the results profoundly validated the BPS model in a real-world setting. When surveyed, the reappraisal students reported significantly less math evaluation anxiety.
Wow, just from reading the text.
More importantly, when asked to rate their perceived coping resources versus the demands of the upcoming test, the reappraisal group showed a marked increase in their ratio of resources to demands.
So the subconscious math equation shifted. They actually felt equipped.
They did,
Yeah.
and it translated directly into academic success. On exam 2, the reappraisal students showed a distinct improvement in their scores.
The mean difference was an improvement of 0.19, right?
Exactly. Whereas the control group actually performed worse than their baseline. Their mean difference was a negative 0.21.
That's a big split.
But as compelling as these behavioral results were, the researchers knew they needed to look at the underlying biological mechanisms happening right there at the desks.
And that leads us to the massive 2021 update.
Yes.
This is the paper that absolutely blew my mind when I was reading through the sources. It was published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, General. Reappraising stress arousal improves effective neuroendocrine and academic performance outcomes in community college classrooms.
It's a powerhouse study.
This time, they had 339 students taking real in-class exams, and they didn't just look at grades. They collected saliva samples right there in the classroom before the tests.
Which is an incredible logistical feat.
They were measuring two specific hormones, cortisol and testosterone.
The inclusion of these specific hormones provides just a fascinating window into the endocrinology of stress. Let's look at cortisol first.
Okay, cortisol.
Cortisol is a glucocorticoid. It's deeply integrated with the body's threat response. It is a catabolic hormone.
I want to make sure we understand the physical reality of a catabolic hormone. What does catabolic actually mean when it's flooding your system during a math test?
Good question. Catabolism is the metabolic process of breaking things down. When you are in a chronic threat state, cortisol floods your system to rapidly break down complex molecules to dump glucose into your bloodstream.
For immediate energy.
Yes, but prolonged exposure to high cortisol is profoundly damaging.
What does it do?
It breaks down muscle tissue, impairs immune function, and critically, it interferes with memory retrieval in the hippocampus.
Oh, wow. So when you sit down for a test, look at a question you know you studied, and your mind just goes completely blank.
That is often cortisol interfering with your neural pathways. It is the biological signature of feeling overwhelmed and defeated.
So high cortisol during an exam is the enemy of memory. It's the feeling of panic and systemic wear and tear.
Right.
What about testosterone then? Why measure that?
Testosterone is an anabolic hormone, meaning it promotes the building and repairing of tissue. Now, in popular culture, testosterone is almost exclusively associated with male aggression or physical dominance.
Right. Gym bros and fighting.
But in the context of cognitive performance and social psychology, it acts as a critical index of confidence, status seeking, and approach motivation.
I think we really need a better analogy for testosterone in this context because the aggression cliche is super misleading.
It really is.
It's not about wanting to fight the teacher. It's more about a shift in strategic orientation. Like, if cortisol is playing defense, hunkering down, trying to survive, hoping you don't fail too badly, then a spike in testosterone is shifting to playing offense.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it.
It is a chemical marker that says, I have the tools to win this, and I am going to attack this challenge head on. It's the biology of stepping up to the plate rather than backing away from it.
Exactly. Shifting from defense to offense.
Yeah.
And the saliva tests from this 2021 study revealed exactly that shift.
What did the numbers look like?
The students who read the reappraisal prompt showed blunted cortisol reactivity during exam 2 and exam 3. Their defensive wear and tear response was significantly lowered.
And the testosterone.
Simultaneously, they showed a robust increase in testosterone. The stats showed a beta of 0.15 with a p-value less than 0.001. The correlation coefficient R was 0.18.
So by simply reading a short explanation about their racing heart was helping them, their entire endocrine system rapidly reconfigured itself.
It did. Lowering a catabolic hormone while raising an anabolic hormone is the ultimate biological signature of moving from a threat state to a challenge state.
That's amazing.
The students didn't just mentally trick themselves into feeling a bit more positive. Their physical chemistry literally realigned to actively support memory retrieval and resilience.
And the long-term ripple effects of that chemical shift are what make this so vital. I saw that the researchers tracked these students over the whole semester.
Yes, they did.
The reappraisal students didn't just score higher on those specific exams. They actually persisted in their courses at a higher rate, meaning the dropout rate decreased.
And they self-reported procrastinating less on their homework.
They also adopted what psychologists call performance approach goals. What does that mean exactly?
It means they were increasingly motivated by the desire to master the material and excel, rather than simply being motivated by the fear of failing.
So the biological shift catalyzed a long-term behavioral shift.
Exactly.
It is incredibly profound that we can leverage our biology like that. But I want to pivot slightly here.
Okay, where to?
Because everything we've discussed so far is what the literature calls domain-specific. We've been talking about arousal reappraisal, which is changing how you view your racing heart in the exact specific moment you are sitting down for a math test or walking onto a stage.
Right, it's a micro-intervention.
But what if we zoom out? What if we want to change how you view the entire concept of stress in all areas of your life?
Now we are transitioning from domain-specific appraisals to domain general mindset.
Mindsets, okay.
This is where we integrate the pioneering work of Alia Crum and her colleagues. We can look closely at a 2017 paper published by Crum, Akinola, and others. It's titled The Role of Stress Mindset in Shaping Cognitive, Emotional, and Neuroendocrine Responses.
And Crum's overarching theory basically posits that human beings operate under one of two macro mindsets regarding stress, right?
Exactly. And these mindsets act like a pervasive lens through which you interpret your entire life.
So what are the two mindsets?
The first is a stress-is-enhancing mindset. This is the deep-seated belief that experiencing stress inherently leads to greater productivity, improved health, and personal growth.
It is the belief that friction creates strength.
Beautifully put, yes. The second is the stress is debilitating mindset, which is the culturally dominant view we discussed at the beginning.
The belief that stress inherently damages health, depletes energy, and destroys performance.
Right. So how do you actually test the biological impact of a worldview?
Yeah, you can't just ask people what they believe and take their word for it. That's not good science.
Exactly. So they utilized a very elegant experimental design. Participants were brought in and shown short, 3-minute video clips.
What were the videos about?
These videos presented factual, scientifically accurate information, but they were curated to orient the viewer toward either the enhancing mindset or the debilitating mindset.
Oh, clever.
Following the video, the participants were subjected to the TSST.
Oh, that brutal social stress task with the unsmiling judges again?
Yes, followed by a battery of cognitive tests. And just like the previous studies, the researchers looked under the hood biologically.
Measuring cortisol again.
They measured cortisol, yes, but they also measured a hormone called DHEAS.
DHEAS. That stands for dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate, right?
Correct.
Tell me what this hormone actually does in the brain, because this seems to be the secret weapon of the stress-enhancing mindset.
DHEAS is a fascinating neurosteroid. Like testosterone, it is an anabolic hormone, but its protective qualities for the brain are just remarkable.
How so?
It promotes physiological toughening, cellular growth, and recovery. But more importantly, it acts as a direct buffer against the neurotoxic effects of excessive cortisol.
Wait, really? It blocks the damage?
Basically, yes. When you are highly stressed, cortisol can damage the neural pathways in your hippocampus. The HEAS actively protects those pathways and promotes neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and rewire itself under pressure.
So when the researchers analyzed the hormone levels of the people who watched these 3-minute videos, what did the DHEAS levels look like?
The results were striking. The group that was primed with the stresses-enhancing mindset experienced a sharp quadratic increase in DHEAS following the social stressor.
The p-value was 0.002 on that, right? And the eta squared was 0.109.
Yes, very statistically significant.
I want to visualize a quadratic increase, though. Does that mean it just shot up and stayed high all day?
No, a quadratic curve means it spiked sharply right when the biological system needed it during the acute stressor, providing a massive surge of neuroprotection. And then it smoothly recovered back to baseline once the threat passed.
Oh, so it wasn't a chronic, lingering elevation?
Exactly. It was a precise, highly functional deployment of a growth-promoting hormone.
And did it affect their behavior?
It did. Behaviorally, this enhancing mindset group demonstrated significantly higher cognitive flexibility during the tasks that followed the stressor. They were able to pivot and solve problems faster because their brains were physically protected from the cortisol dump.
This distinction between Jamieson's work on in-the-moment reappraisal and Crum's work on macro mindsets is kind of subtle, but I think it's the key to making this practically useful.
It's a crucial distinction.
I read this analogy in their joint 2018 review paper published in Emotion Review. The paper is titled Optimizing Stress Responses with Reappraisal and Mindsets. I want to expand on this analogy because it really helped this click for me.
Oh, the ski slope analogy. Yes, let's
Yeah.
talk about that.
Right. Imagine you are a novice skier and you find yourself standing at the top of a terrifying, steep, icy black diamond ski slope.
A nightmare scenario for a novice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So reappraisal, the in-the-moment tool we talked about first, is what you do right as you are looking down the mountain. Your heart is hammering against your ribs. Reappraisal is fixing your physical stance, regulating your breathing, and telling yourself, this adrenaline is giving my legs the power to make these turns.
You are managing the immediate, visceral, physical panic of the moment.
Exactly. But a stress-enhancing mindset operates on a completely different level. It is the overarching belief that the act of falling, struggling, getting bruised, and facing that terrifying icy slope is exactly the process that will eventually make you an expert skier in the long run.
The mindset doesn't make the slope less steep.
No. And it doesn't stop your heart from racing, but it changes the meaning of the struggle. One tool manages the moment, the other manages the meaning.
I think exploring that distinction is critical. Because a mindset is a metacognitive process, it continues to operate even when you objectively fail.
How does that work?
Well, think back to the BPS model. If you are a true novice on that black diamond slope, your situational demands objectively exceed your personal resources.
Yeah, I'm definitely in a threat state.
You are. You are going to experience a threat state. You're probably going to crash. But if you hold a stresses-enhancing mindset, your brain is still able to extract long-term value from that biological stress.
Oh, I see.
You view the failure not as a devastating confirmation of your inadequacy, but as a necessary friction for growth. The mindset buffers the psychological blow of defeat.
Which is such a hopeful, empowering message. But, it also leads me to a really tough question that I think we just have to address.
Let's do it.
It is easy to talk about embracing stress when you are skiing for fun or when you are a privileged student sitting in a pristine university laboratory. But do these psychological interventions actually hold up for people who don't have a safety net?
It's a very fair question.
Can a mindset shift really help those who are carrying the heaviest systemic and economic burdens in our society? Or is this just an intellectual luxury for the comfortable?
That is perhaps the most important question in this entire field of research. And it brings us to a highly impactful 2021 paper published in the journal Emotion.
Who authored this one?
It was authored by Goyer, Akinola, Grunberg, and Crum. It's titled Thriving Under Pressure: The Effects of Stress-Related Wise Interventions on Affect, Sleep, and Exam Performance for College Students from Disadvantaged Backgrounds.
What did the demographic landscape of this study look like? Like, who are they actually working with?
The researchers focused entirely on 140 incoming freshmen at an elite university who came specifically from socially and economically disadvantaged backgrounds.
Okay, so this is a population that faces intense compounded stressors.
Exactly. They aren't just dealing with the academic rigor of an elite institution. They're often dealing with severe financial strain, imposter syndrome, belonging uncertainty, and a profound cultural mismatch between their home lives and the university environment.
The stress load is just immense.
It is.
So how did they intervene with this specific group?
During a summer enrichment program before the semester started, the students were divided into 3 groups. The first group received stress mindset training, teaching them the enhancing, growth-oriented nature of stress.
Okay.
The second group received standard stress management training.
Let's clarify what standard stress management means here, because it's the default advice given by almost every college counseling center in the country.
Right.
It focuses heavily on avoiding or reducing stress, teaching time management, prioritizing 8 hours of sleep, practicing deep breathing, maybe doing some yoga. The goal is to minimize your stress footprint.
Correct. It frames stress as a problem to be solved through reduction. And the third group was a control group that received no specific stress training at all.
So what happened when the semester started?
The researchers just let the semester play out. Fast forward 10 months later to the grueling 5-day spring final exam week. This is arguably the most stressful academic week of the entire year.
Oh, without doubt.
The researchers used experience sampling methodology.
Meaning they pinged the students via a mobile app.
Yes, twice a day, every day during finals week.
So they're tracking their emotional state and their sleep habits in real time, right in the middle of the academic crucible. What did the data show?
The initial findings might seem highly counterintuitive. When they looked at sleep duration and negative affect, which measures feelings of sadness, acute anxiety, exhaustion, or worry, There were no significant differences across the three groups.
Wait, really? So despite the training, they were just as exhausted and just as anxious as everybody else?
Yes, they were objectively suffering through a difficult week. But here is the critical divergence. The stress mindset group showed significantly higher positive affect alongside the negative.
Interesting.
Despite the exhaustion, they reported much higher levels of feeling proud, inspired, and determined.
I am struggling to reconcile that a bit. If they didn't get more sleep and they didn't feel less anxiety, how did the mindset training actually help them academically? Because the goal here isn't just to feel inspired, it's to pass the exams.
The answer lies in a phenomenon the researchers call the decoupling effect. This is the cornerstone finding of this study.
The decoupling effect, okay.
In the untrained control group, there was a very strong, predictable negative association between their level of stress during exam week and their final academic performance.
So for them, high stress universally equaled bad grades.
Exactly. The weight of the stress dragged their cognitive performance down. But for the students in the stress mindset group, that link was entirely severed.
Wow.
They experienced incredibly high stress, they felt the anxiety, but it did not lead to lower grades. The mindset intervention successfully decoupled the experience of severe stress from the outcome of academic failure.
That is a staggering finding. How does a mindset achieve that decoupling mechanically? How do you sever the link between feeling terrible and performing terribly?
It fundamentally comes down to the mechanics of emotional acceptance. A stress-enhancing mindset intrinsically accepts negative affect as a natural part of the process.
Okay, so it normalizes it.
Yes. It teaches the student that it is perfectly normal and even expected to feel deeply sad, worried, or exhausted during a brutally hard week. It completely removes the pressure to suppress those feelings.
Because normally when we feel anxious, we get anxious about being anxious. We think, oh no, I'm stressed. This means I'm going to fail. I need to calm down. It becomes a recursive loop.
Exactly. That recursive loop of rumination consumes massive amounts of cognitive bandwidth. By simply accepting the negative emotion without fighting it, the mindset creates psychological space for simultaneous positive affect.
Wow.
A student can feel physically exhausted and deeply anxious, but simultaneously feel a profound sense of pride and determination, because they view the stress as a crucible for their future growth.
That makes a lot of sense.
This simultaneous positive effect, feeling proud while feeling tired, acts as a psychological timeout. It provides a vital moment of emotional restoration that interrupts the downward spiral of panic, preserving the cognitive bandwidth they desperately need to sit down and pass their chemistry final.
That is incredibly profound. They aren't succeeding by eliminating the darkness. They are succeeding by making sure the light stays on at the exact same time.
It's beautifully complex.
It really is. It's not about toxic positivity where you pretend everything is fine. It's about complex emotional reality. The stress is hard, but the stress is also making me stronger.
Precisely.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. We have arousal reappraisal for the acute micro moment, the racing heart before you step on stage. And we have stress mindsets for the macro level, viewing a brutal week of exams as an opportunity for growth. What happens when we put these tools together?
For that, we look to the absolute frontier of this scientific field. This is captured in a 2022 paper titled A Synergistic Mindset's Intervention Protects Adolescents from Stress by Yeager, Jamieson, and an extensive team of colleagues.
Synergistic mindsets. I like that phrase.
This research builds upon a foundation they laid in a 2016 paper published in Psychological Science titled How to Improve Adolescent Stress Responses.
Let's step back to that 2016 foundation first. What were they putting together back then?
In 2016, the researchers began integrating the BPS model of stress with what are known as implicit theories of personality.
Wait, implicit theories of personality?
In layman's terms, this is the growth mindset. The deep belief that people's core traits and abilities are malleable and can change over time.
Okay, got it.
They took adolescents who were experiencing high levels of social stress, which for a teenager often revolves around bullying and social hierarchy, and taught them that people, including their bullies, have the capacity to change.
Because if you believe a bully is permanently evil, the social threat feels inescapable. But if you believe people can change, the situational demands of high school suddenly feel a little more manageable.
Precisely. It reduced the perceived social threat. And the biological data from CON16 backed this up.
What did the data show?
On days that teenagers reported experiencing high social stress, the growth mindset intervention significantly lowered their daily cortisol levels. The Cohen's D was 0.19, and it moderated their DHEAS levels compared to the control group with a D of 0.11.
So just teaching them that people can change literally altered their daily hormonal baseline.
It did.
Okay, so that was the baseline. What did they do in the 2022 paper to make it synergistic?
In 2022, they developed a truly synergistic approach by combining two distinct interventions. They taught the adolescents the growth mindset that people can change, and they simultaneously taught them the stress can be enhancing mindset.
Ah, so they provided a dual-layered cognitive toolkit.
Yep.
I am so curious how you measure the biological impact of something that complex. Did they use saliva tests again?
Actually, they utilized a much more continuous and precise measurement technique called impedance cardiography.
Impedance cardiography, that sounds intense. How does that work in layman's terms?
It is a non-invasive cardiovascular monitoring system. Researchers placed strategically located sticky electrodes on the participant's torso. These electrodes send a very tiny, imperceptible electrical current through the chest cavity.
Okay.
By measuring the slight resistance or impedance to that electrical current as it passes through the blood in the thorax, the machine can continuously calculate exactly how much blood the heart is pumping with every single beat and how much resistance the blood vessels are creating.
So instead of just a snapshot from a saliva sample, you get a real-time, second-by-second movie of their cardiovascular system while they are stressed.
Exactly. They put the teenagers through the TSST public speaking task while hooked up to the impedance cardiography monitors.
What were they looking for specifically?
They were looking specifically at total peripheral resistance, which is the constriction of the vessels, and the pre-ejection period, which measures the sympathetic nervous system's direct influence on the heart. They were hunting for that real-time biological signature of challenge versus threat.
And what did the real-time data show when these kids had the synergistic toolkit?
The results were highly significant and incredibly encouraging. The synergistic intervention fundamentally altered the adolescent's cardiovascular reactivity. First, it significantly reduced negative event-focused appraisals,
Meaning what, exactly?
meaning the teenagers were much less likely to view the unsmiling judges or the speech itself as a catastrophic threat. The average treatment effect, or ATE, was negative 0.11.
That's substantial.
Second, it reduced negative response-focused appraisals. The ATE there was negative 0.19.
And response-focused means?
It means when their hearts started racing, they were less likely to view their own bodily sensations as harmful or embarrassing.
Oh, I see. Because they had this dual armor, the impedance cardiography proved that their bodies steered away from the damaging vasoconstrictive friction of a threat state.
Yes.
And they successfully transitioned into the highly efficient blood-flowing challenge state.
They absolutely did.
I just marvel at the architecture of this synergistic toolkit. We aren't just giving teenagers one mental trick to survive high school. We are helping them build a customized, multi-layered cognitive armor.
It's very robust defense.
You are teaching a young person that A, the bullies picking on you have the capacity to change and grow, so the social hierarchy you are trapped in isn't permanent.
Right.
And B, the intense, overwhelming physical stress you feel right now in your chest is actually a biological resource that is making your brain stronger and more resilient for the future. That combination is staggeringly powerful.
It is powerful because it addresses both the external trigger and the internal response simultaneously. This integrated approach, which the literature refers to as stress optimization, or SO, represents where the entire field of psychology and neurobiology is heading.
Stress optimization.
Yes. It demands a fundamental shift in our cultural valuation of stress. We have to move aggressively away from the deeply ingrained belief that stress is purely a toxin that must be avoided, and move toward the scientifically validated belief that stress is a potent resource to be utilized.
The most profound philosophical takeaway from this entire decade of research is that it exposes a devastating self-reinforcing cycle in our society.
It really does.
When we blindly believe that stress is toxic, we fear it. When we feel it in our bodies, that fear causes us to panic or try to suppress it.
And that act of suppression is exactly what triggers the severe vasoconstriction, the massive cortisol dump, and the cognitive impairment characteristic of a threat state.
So the fear of the stress is what actually causes the biological damage we are so afraid of in the first place. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. By optimizing our appraisals and our mindsets, we finally break that cycle. Okay, let's take a breath and recap the incredible journey we've been on today. We started at the biological foundation with the BPS model, learning that a pounding heart can mean two very different things.
A damaging threat state with constricted blood vessels, or an empowering challenge state with free-flowing blood.
Then we learned from the 2010 GRE study that simply reappraising that racing heart as a performance-enhancing tool spiked physical arousal, but drove up test scores months later.
Right.
We then zoomed out to the community college classroom, seeing how this reappraisal physically altered the ratio of catabolic cortisol to anabolic testosterone.
Shifting students from playing defense to playing offense and keeping them enrolled in school.
Then we widen the lens even further to Alia Crum's foundational work on overarching mindsets, discovering that believing stress is enhancing literally releases the protective brain hormone DHEAS.
A literal chemical shield.
We saw how this mindset helps disadvantaged students decouple their massive anxiety from their academic performance by allowing them to feel proud and determined even when they are exhausted.
The decoupling effect.
And finally, we saw how combining these tools into a synergistic armor can fundamentally alter the real-time cardiovascular reactivity of teenagers facing intense social evaluation.
It is a profound, meticulously documented body of evidence. It demonstrates that our minds have an incredible, tangible capacity to shape our physiological reality down to the cellular level.
It really is. And it leaves me with this final paradigm-shattering thought to leave with you. Modern society has built a multi-billion-dollar stress reduction industry. We are surrounded by endless spas, meditation apps, supplements, and wellness gurus.
All selling us the exact same message.
Yes, the message that you must relax to survive, you must eliminate stress to be healthy. But looking at the sheer volume of peer-reviewed endocrinology and cardiovascular data we just covered, I am left wondering, what if the modern medical model of universally demonizing stress is inadvertently causing the very allostatic load, chronic disease, and accelerated brain aging it seeks to prevent?
It's a sobering thought.
What if our culture's endless, obsessive stress about being stressed is the true toxin? Perhaps the cure for our modern anxiety isn't retreating from the heat or trying to desperately quiet the alarm. Maybe the cure is simply welcoming the fire. Take that reframed, highly potent physiological energy into whatever challenge you are facing next.